Deus Ex Machina. You've heard this before, but you're like, I'm not even sure what it is. I'm not even sure if I can use it in a screenplay. But really the more important question is, should you use it? So we're going to pull that apart today. We're going to talk about it and talk about whether or not you should or might want to use it in your screenplay. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking if you find value. Subscribe if you haven't done that. There's some links below that might be of interest to you. Be sure to check those out. Let's not waste any more time. Let's jump in. You know, sometimes when we're crafting a story, the story just kind of misbehaves. It starts going in a direction that we don't want it to go, and we try to get it back on track, and it keeps wanting to go a different direction. And so what we do is we resort to this tool called Deus Ex Machina. But some of you might be thinking, okay, I've heard that, but what is it? Let's just get that out of the way. Deus Ex Machina is an unexpected power or event saving a seemingly hopeless situation, especially as a contrived plot device in a play, screenplay, or novel. It literally means God from the machine. It's kind of come to mean the hand of God or the hand of the storyteller. This is when the storyteller is kind of reaching their hand into the story, moving things around, and the audience is going, you're cheating. The initial response is we should not be using Deus Ex Machina. Well, the problem is it gets used all the time. And really where we see it is when we see a character, a protagonist is going along and something unexpectedly helps them in a way, right? Like it's something beyond their control. They can't control it, but something happens and it ends up helping them. That's Deus Ex Machina. So an example would be maybe you've got a character who's going to a job interview, okay, and they're just trying to get there and they're just gonna be late and they're fretting and we're like, oh, they really needed this job. This is gonna be bad. Only for that character to show up and to find out, oh, there was a wreck on the highway and the boss is also gonna be late. Whew. Right? It's this whole like, somebody orchestrated something to make it all okay. The character's stressed for nothing. Or maybe you've got a character who's tied up, right? They're held prisoner somewhere. Like, oh, if they only had a knife. Huh. What's that? A knife. Like, it's just right there. Like, that's convenient. It's too convenient. Deus Ex Machina. Or, what about this example? Here's the thing, Deus Ex Machina is not always bad, and you do want to use it, and you can use it, but you have to be aware of some of the kind of like unwritten rules or guidelines for using it effectively so that it plays out as you want it to play out in your story. So the first question of can you use it? Yes, you can use it. It gets used a lot. It gets used all the time. Pretty much every movie you watch, every TV show you watch, they're using it at least once. Now, sometimes it's a little more disguised than others, but it tends to get used a lot. So yes, you can use it. The problem is sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, right? And you're aware of this. You can think of instances probably where you're like, oh, there you're cheating there. You're doing something that just makes it convenient, right? So here's some guidelines to help you know when it's working well. Okay, so if you use Deus Ex Machina in these ways, it's usually gonna be okay. First, if you do something early on in the story, so we're talking Act 1, if you're doing something there that helps your protagonist, it's usually okay. If you're just like, doing something where it's like, oh, here's this thing that's just gonna make their life a little better, like that's usually not a problem early on. The later you get in the story, the more you need to avoid helping your protagonist. You actually, and this is number 2, start to hurt your protagonist. So if it's a Deus Ex Machina moment that hurts or hinders your protagonist, all good to go. Like, drop them in. The corollary to thinking about this, and this is number 3, is anything that helps your antagonist achieve what they're wanting to achieve, also always good. You can always get away with it. Well, I shouldn't say always, but most of the time it's going to be fine if you're helping your antagonist. Help your protagonist early in the story. As the story goes on, you can't help them as much. You actually start to have to hinder them and make it more difficult for them. And any time in the story you can help your antagonist, using Deus Ex Machina in those instances is usually just fine. Now, using this tool is also helpful if you want to create a comedic moment. A lot of times comedy happens because of little surprises or little unexpected things. And this makes the audience feel satisfied when it happens. So it's usually a good thing to include if you're going to try a comedic element, something that we just don't expect, right? Here's this one thing and like, oh no, here's this, and it becomes a comedic moment. That's usually perfectly fine to include Deus Ex Machina then. Deus Ex Machina can also be useful if you're trying to help make sense of the story. So you've just got a very complex story and you need to explain it in a very simple way, or have something happen where we can explain it in a very simple way. You can use Deus Ex Machina. The problem is this one kind of gets frowned upon because it makes it feel like your storytelling and your story creation is a little bit lazy or off point, because you want it to be very concise and specific. So when you start having to explain things, that's usually a problem that's a result from the story not working. And then we use a storytelling technique of Deus Ex Machina to try to cover it up, and it's not always a good thing. Can it be done? Yes. Has it been done? Yes. Can people still do it and get away with it? Yes. So you can do it. It is useful if you're trying to do it for that purpose. But again, this one's just kind of frowned upon, so just be aware of that. One other time that Deus Ex Machina is useful is if you want to surprise the audience. Now, this one gets used a lot in horror films, right? The person is walking through the house and we thought we saw the killer outside and suddenly the killer's right there, right? Like, how did you step back and think about it? You're like, the only way they could have got there is teleporting. But when you're watching the movie, you kind of don't care. You're fine with being surprised. It's this kind of like entity that's haunting people or hunting people or whatever it is, and we're kind of okay with that. So if you're trying to surprise the audience with something, it usually is okay to get away with using Deus Ex Machina. Now, all of these things, all three of these that I just mentioned, a comedic moment, trying to explain the story, and surprising the audience, they all still have to make sense for your story. They all still have to fit. They all still have to feel like they're part of the story, that you aren't breaking the rules of the world that you have created or the rules of the character. So if a character is kind of an evil entity and can kind of show up in lots of places and you've established that, then absolutely they show up over here and it makes things worse for our protagonist. It helps out the antagonist, all those wonderful, glorious things. So to recap, yes, you can use it. Yes, it's helpful. But here's the real big question. Should you use it? Before I jump into that, if you're finding value, please subscribe if you haven't done that, comment below, comment on a Deus Ex Machina moment where it either was used really well or it just pulled you out of the story. So drop that in the comments below. If you think this video would be helpful to other people, then share it across social media. That would be awesome. So YouTube really likes those things and it helps other people find this channel and find the videos on it. So thank you for doing that. All right, should you use Deus Ex Machina? Okay. Litmus test number 1. Does it make it more difficult for the protagonist? Pretty much in every case. If it makes it more difficult for the protagonist, green light. 100% go forward, do that. Yes, absolutely, Deus Ex Machina. It's still got to make sense for the story. Remember, it's got to make sense for your story. So you can't be just doing things and suddenly somebody appears that can do magic. That doesn't make sense, right? So it's got to make sense for the story. But if it makes things more difficult for your protagonist, it's almost always a green light. Go ahead, it's going to be fine. Number 2 is, think of this question. Will using this storytelling tool, Deus Ex Machina, will it promote the emotional response out of the audience that you are hoping for? So as a storyteller, you are in some ways manipulating the emotions of the audience. You want them to laugh, and so you do something comedic and they laugh. You are manipulating their emotions in a sense. And if you do something using this tool of Deus Ex Machina to help manipulate the audience's emotional response to get it to be what you're wanting it to be, then usually it's okay. Now, again, it's got to make sense for the story. I can't say that enough. It's got to make sense for the story. It can't come out of the blue. It's got to feel organic, okay? But can you do it? Yes, you can do it. You should, though, if you're trying to manipulate the emotions of the audience to make them feel a specific way, is this Deus Ex Machina moment, is it making them feel that thing? If it's not, then you shouldn't use it. But if it's making them feel the thing you're wanting them to feel, it's helping with their emotional satisfaction of the story, then yes, go ahead and do it. The last question you need to ask, will the audience feel like you cheated? Will they feel like you cheated? Will they feel like this moment that happened was unearned? Now, I've mentioned a few things here. So It should not help the protagonist, especially at the end. Should help the antagonist. It should, make things more difficult, like all those things, right? I mentioned those. It should make sense for the story. But I showed you an example early on from Jurassic Park. This is at the pretty much the end of the film. The T-Rex comes in and saves our heroes, right? It's a Deus Ex Machina moment 100%. And it helps the protagonist. And it's at the end of the story. It seems like it contradicts all the things that I've mentioned. But it's because of this question. Will the audience feel like you cheated? And in that movie, watching that moment, you don't feel like the storytellers cheated, right? The audience isn't going to feel like you cheated in that moment. They're going to feel satisfied. Our heroes got away. They're able to navigate all of this. The dinosaurs are kind of starting to do their own thing. Like, this is a great moment. The audience feels like it's satisfied. The audience comes away from that moment with a, whew, I'm so glad that happened, right? We don't feel like the storytellers cheated in that instance. And that is a really good litmus test. If you think that the audience is going to say, oh, you cheated, okay, you shouldn't be using it. Got to find another way to do it. Even if it's getting the emotional response you want, even if it's hindering the protagonist, even if it's helping the antagonist, doesn't matter. This is kind of like the big question, right? If the audience thinks that you've cheated, you're done. You can't do that. You can't cheat. Tell a good story, right? Figure out another way to do it. Don't use this tool if it's going to feel like you cheated. Is this a cheating tool? Kinda. It's kind of a cheating tool because you can get away with some things as long as you are creating the emotional response that you want to create, that you're hindering your protagonist as much as you can, because that's always a green light, and the audience doesn't feel like you've cheated. So yes, you can use Deus Ex Machina. It's okay to use it. It can be helpful, and just keep those questions in mind, especially the last one of make sure the audience doesn't think that you're cheating when you use it. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please be sure to like, subscribe, bell. I really appreciate it. If you want to learn a little bit more about Deus Ex Machina, you can watch this video here. It will talk about some second act problems that happen as a result of Deus Ex Machina and how you can kind of fix those. So that might be helpful to you. Thank you so much again for watching. When you go to tell a story that matters. See you later.